Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another Magic Arena gameplay video. Today we're taking a look at the monoblack starter deck, Graveyard Bash. First off, we'll take a look at the deck list and play a game with the deck without making any changes to it out of the box. And then afterwards I'll show you how to gradually upgrade the deck. We'll go over all those gradual changes and then we'll play some games with the fully upgraded deck as well. So first off, let's take a look at the list. So Graveyard Bash has a bit of a zombie sub-theme with cards like Death Baron giving other skeletons and zombies we control +1/+1 and Death Touch. We also have a lot of graveyard recursion with cards like Gravedigger, returning a creature from our graveyard back to our hand. We've got a Rise from the Grave, which can return a creature from any graveyard to the battlefield, and it will be a zombie in addition to its other types. And our rare Gravewaker can also return creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And then of course we've got a lot of spot removal, which is known for the mono black decks. We've got 3 copies of Murder that can destroy any creature, and we've got Strangling Spores giving a creature -3/-3 until end of turn. So these are some of the standout cards in the deck. And then of course we've got Open the Graves as a powerful enchantment, giving us a 2/2 zombie token whenever a non-token creature we control dies. So let's go over the entire list here, starting out with the 1-drops, where we have 2 copies of Diregraf Ghoul, 1 mana for a 2/2 zombie that enters the battlefield tapped. Then we have 2 copies of Skullduggery, which can give one of our creatures +1/+1 until end of turn, and an opposing creature -1/-1 until end of turn, which can be a powerful combat trick. You do need to have 2 targets before you can cast the Skullduggery, so if either player does not have a legal target, you won't be able to cast it. Then we also have 3 copies of Doomed Dissenter as a 2 mana 1/1 human that when it dies leaves behind a 2/2 zombie token. We also have 3 copies of Walking Corpse, which is just a 2 mana 2/2 zombie. Then of course our Death Baron, boosting up other zombies. We've got 3 copies of Deathbloom Thallid as a 3 mana 3/2 that when it dies leaves behind a 1/1 Sapperling token. We've got 2 copies of Hired Blade as a 3 mana 3/2 with Flash that we can play at instant speed to maybe ambush an opposing creature. We've got Murder as our premium removal spell. Then we have 2 Skymarch Bloodletters as 3 mana 2/2 flying vampires that when it enters the battlefield drains the opponent for 1 life, gaining us 1 life. We've got 2 copies of Gravedigger, giving us a bit of card advantage, returning a creature from our graveyard back to our hand. Then we have 2 copies of Infectious Horror as another zombie, 4 mana for a 2/2 that makes the opponent lose 2 life whenever it attacks. Then we've got our 2 Strangling Spores as another removal spell. Then moving on to our 5-drops, we've got our 1 copy of Open the Graves as a powerful enchantment. Rise from the Grave, which can either reanimate an opposing creature or our own creature, and of course combines well with our removal spells like Murder, since you can take out an opposing bomb and then steal it with Rise from the Grave. Also turns it into a zombie, so has a bit of synergy with our Death Baron there as well. Then we've got 2 Vampire Sovereigns as another powerful 5-drop that drains the opponent for 3 life when it enters the battlefield and is a 3/4 flying vampire. Then we've got 1 Yargle, 5 mana for a 9/3, so can hit pretty hard if you can clear a path. Then we've got our Gravewaker as a curve topper, 6 mana for a 5/5 flyer, and for 7 mana we can return a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And then finally 1 Meteor Golem, 7 mana for a 3/3 that can take out any non-land permanent when it enters the battlefield. And then 25 basic swamps. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into a game and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand seems okay. Got a decent curve. 2 mana Walking Corpse, 3 mana Hired Blade or Murder, and then Open the Graves is one of our powerful curve toppers. Let's see what we're up against. Turn 2 Doomed Dissenter, so could be a mirror match. Let's play our Walking Corpse. So the goal this game is going to be to get up to 5 mana as soon as possible and then make our trades with opposing creatures once we have the Open the Graves in play. So we want to avoid trading our creatures beforehand. I'm fine blocking the Doomed Dissenter still, I think. Since if our opponent also has an Open the Graves, it benefits us to kill their Doomed Dissenter before they have it in play. Alright, they had a Plague Mare to finish off our Walking Corpse, that's unfortunate. So punished us for blocking there. Alright, so what's our play? Can play a Bloodletter, put a flyer in play. We're going to take some damage from their ground creatures. We could play Hired Blade and trade it off. We could also Murder, but I didn't really want to murder any of those. So I think the play is going to be to play the Bloodletter, but we're not going to block with it yet. So we'll take some damage from their creatures, but then hopefully we can get to 5 mana on curve to play Open the Graves, and then we can start trading And in the meantime we can get in some flying damage with the Bloodletter. Opponent also with the Death Baron, so that's a much better target for murder here. So we'll take 5. Alright. Still not really interested in trading the Bloodletter, and we did pick up land 5, which means we get to play Open the Graves next turn. And now we can either flash in a Hired Blade to ambush Death Baron, or we can just cast a murder on it. So we're definitely going to use our life total as a resource here. Opponent does send in the Death Baron. Of course, our opponent could have their own murder. So if we flash in the Hired Blade to try and block Death Baron, they could just kill it. Plus there's argument of keeping our creatures until after Open the Graves is in place. I think casting murder here makes sense. And then only take 4 instead of 7. And another Doomed Dissenter. Alright. Let's play Open the Graves, and now I'm fine keeping the Bloodletter back since it's all about making those zombie tokens. Could potentially still attack for 2, but taking 5 down to 7 starts getting a little bit sketchy. And Chupacabra killing Bloodletter means we still get a zombie token from Open the Graves, which we can block with. And our opponent gets in there, so we can block the Doomed Dissenter, take 4 down to 8, or we can just trade for a Plague Mare or a zombie token. I think I'll trade for the Plague Mare. Again, the same argument that our opponent might have their own Open the Graves. The argument for blocking the zombie token would be if they have a second Death Baron. Alright, Strangling Spores to pick up. So we can either play a Deathbloom Thallid here to block with, or we can flash in Hired Blade to maybe ambush a Doomed Dissenter. But we actively want our creatures to die, so I think playing the Thallid makes more sense here. And then just block a Chupacabra, hope our opponent doesn't attack with the Doomed Dissenter, we'll see. If we draw a 6th land, we can play both Hired Blades next turn. And our opponent with Murder on the Deathbloom Thallid, making a Saproling and a zombie token. So that was a good exchange for us. And our opponent gets in with everyone. So again, I think I like taking out the Chupacabra here. And we could trade a Saproling for a Doomed Dissenter, give them another zombie. Don't hate it. Alright, Vampire Sovereign was a good draw too. I think we're fine playing that here, it's more mana efficient than playing Hired Blade or Strangling Spores. Blocks the zombies profitably, and if they kill the Sovereign then we still get a zombie, so that's fine. It's gonna be Gravedigger, probably returning Death Baron here. Nope, they go for the Chupacabra instead, which also makes sense, can take out the Sovereign next turn. And a Diregraf Ghoul. Land 6 means double Hired Blade. So we might as well attack with the Sovereign since our opponent's likely to kill it with the Chupacabra anyway. And then keep up double Hired Blade here. There's Chupacabra. Gives us a zombie. So yeah, Open the Graves is the card that really kept us in this game. Gets in with everyone. Hired Blade number 1. And Hired Blade number 2. And we'll make some trades. Opponent could have a Skullduggery here, I guess, which would make one of the blocks into a bad block. But given that Hired Blades have 3 power, it's not all that bad. And yep, there's the Skullduggery. So they choose to get in 1 extra damage with the zombie token that was unblocked, which makes sense. Alright, so we're left with 2 zombie tokens at 7 life, facing 3 2-powered creatures with a Strangling Spore still in hand, so I think we're doing okay. Can't really afford to attack here. And another Plague Mare, that's going to make it difficult to block this turn. So that's pretty annoying. So we're going to be forced to use the Strangling Spores here. I think we still target the Chupacabra. We'll take 4 down to 3. Yeah, I think that's a play. And then technically, even if we miss on our next draw step, we could block both 2-power creatures next turn and then take 2, fall to 1. I think that's still our best line. Double blocking here seems kind of bad. But of course we're hoping to draw a spell. Alright, we drew a land, so let's pass a turn and hope that they're out of removal spells. Opponent gets in. We'll make some blocks. Take 2, fall to 1, and hope to top deck Strangling Spores. Alright, that's gonna keep us in the game at least. Opponent attacks. And the Walking Corpse. And yep, the Walking Corpse is gonna be our demise here, so drew a few more lands than our opponent. So even though the Open the Graves kept us in the game pretty long, our opponent had quite a few 2-for-1s there as well with the Gravedigger and the Chupacabra, and eventually was able to get through all our zombie tokens. Alright, now that we got to see the deck in action, it's time to upgrade the deck, and there's some good news here. If you've unlocked the dual color decks, there's quite a few black cards that you can add to the deck from those other starter decks, and one of those is a second copy of Open the Graves, which is available in the red-black Chaos and Mayhem starter deck, so you can have a second copy without having to use any wild cards. Then in the black-white starter deck, Eternal Thirst, there's some nice black cards as well. You can pick up an additional copy of Murder to fill out the playset, and then there's also a copy of Vraska's Contempt as another powerful removal spell that can exile a creature or planeswalker and also gain 2 life for 4 mana at instant speed. So that's another nice rare that you can pick up for the mono black deck here. And then in the blue-black starter deck, Walk the Plank, we get access to 2 copies of a Ravenous Chupacabra as a 4-mana 2/2 that can kill a creature when it enters the battlefield. As we could see in the previous game we just played, can be quite powerful and also has good synergy with our Graveyard Recursion and with our Open the Graves. So we can add 2 copies of a Ravenous Chupacabra without having to use any wild cards. And in the same starter deck, Walk the Plank, we also get access to Demon Lord Balzenlock, which is another powerful curve topper, 6 mana for a 6/6 flyer with trample, and when it enters the battlefield draws us a few additional cards. So that's another card we can add to the deck without having to use any wild cards. So that's already an improvement, so now we need to make some cuts to make room for the newly added cards. So one card we can easily cut is Strangling Spores now that we've added Ravenous Chupacabra and Vraska's Contempts, as well as additional copies of Murder. We don't really need these Strangling Spores anymore. For the most part, Murder is an upgrade over Strangling Spores. Every now and then you'll run into an indestructible creature like a Danto Vanguard, which these Strangling Spores can always kill, but they can make it indestructible in response to Murder. But yeah, for the most part, Strangling Spores is going to be worse. So we can easily cut 2 copies there. Then I also want to cut the Infectious Horror just because it's one of the weaker cards in the deck. Even though it's a zombie, it's just pretty weak based on its stats, and Chupacabra should be an upgrade there as well. And then looking at the rest of the deck, Hired Blade is potentially cuttable, even though it does have a bit of synergy with the newly added Open the Graves. Or we could just cut 1 copy of Yargle, which is one of our weaker cards. 3 toughness creature at 5 mana can often trade down for opposing creatures, so that's not exactly where we want to be. So we could easily cut 1 Yargle. And then I think our final cut is probably going to be a Hired Blade. Just looking at our curve, we've got quite a few 3-drops, and if we would cut a Walking Corpse, we would be a bit short on 2-drops. So cutting a 3-drop here makes sense, and I think Hired Blade's probably the weaker one. So that brings us back to 60 cards. So now it's time to spend some wild cards to keep upgrading the deck, and there's a few directions we could take the deck in. We could kind of go in the mono-black mid-range territory, where we just play a bunch of overall good creatures like Ravenous Chupacabra, but that can get pretty boring pretty quick. So instead I prefer to go down the mono-black zombie route, where we kind of focus on cards like Death Baron and cards like Open the Graves, making a bunch of zombie tokens to take those zombie synergies to the next level. And before we have to use any wild cards, there's some more commons we can add to the deck from some of the other starter decks that will synergize nicely with our mono-black zombie deck. And one of those is an additional copy of Doomed Dissenter, which can be found in the Black-Red Chaos and Mayhem starter deck, so we can easily add a 4th copy here. And then we can also add 2 copies of Vicious Offering, which is present in the Black-Green starter deck, Sapperling Swarm, as another nice cheap removal spell giving -2/-2, and if we sacrifice a creature with the kicker ability, we can give -5/-5 instead. And of course this synergizes nicely with a card like Doomed Dissenter that we've now added an additional copy of. So by adding Vicious Offering and Doomed Dissenter, we can also kind of lower the curve of the deck a little bit. We don't really need the 25th land, so that can go. Meteor Golem at 7 mana is quite expensive, even though it does give us an out to potential problematic permanents like Planeswalkers or enchantments. Getting to 7 mana in this deck is not going to be easy, so I don't mind cutting the Meteor Golem. And then we need to make one more cut. We could cut the other copy of Hired Blade, we could cut one of the Murders now that we've added some Vicious Offerings. So we could go either way here. I think we'll just cut a Hired Blade for now. So that brings us back to 60 cards. And now it's time to bust out the wildcards to keep upgrading the deck. We won't be needing any common wildcards for this upgrade, but we will go over all the uncommons, the rares, and the mythic rares we want to add to the deck. And the first uncommon we want to get is 2 additional copies of Diregraf Ghoul as a nice 1 mana 2/2 zombie for our somewhat aggressive zombie deck. So we'll add a 3rd and 4th copy there. Then our next uncommon we want to add to the deck is 4 copies of Stitcher Supplier, which is a card from M19. 1 mana for a 1/1 zombie. When it enters the battlefield or dies, we get to put the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard, so great at fueling the graveyard for some of our upcoming zombie and graveyard synergies. So we'll add 4 copies of Stitcher Supplier, which also plays nicely with cards like Vicious Offering, since we often don't mind sacrificing a Stitcher Supplier to get additional cards in our graveyard. And then the next uncommon we'll get is 2 copies of Cast Down, as a cheap removal spell destroying target non-legendary creature for 2 mana at instant speed. So that can easily replace 2 copies of Murder, just to have a bit of a lower curve. We can easily cut 2 copies of Skullduggery since we've got plenty of creature interaction now with all the added removal spells. And then we can also cut 2 copies of Skymarsh Bloodletter and 2 copies of Gravedigger. Even though it is a zombie and has good synergy and is a decent card by itself, we'll make up for cutting the Gravedigger by adding 2 copies of Memorial to Folly in our mana base, which is a land that can be used to return a creature card from our graveyard back to our hand if we sacrifice it. So we'll add 2 copies of Memorial and then cut 2 swamps. So we're back down to 60. And now it's time to add some rares to the deck. And the first rare we want to add to the deck is 4 copies of Midnight Reaper, 3 mana for a 3/2 zombie knight, and whenever a non-token creature we control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to us and we draw a card, so it gives us access to a ton of card advantage, plays really well with some of our expendable creatures, like the Stitcher Supplier and the Doomed Dissenter, so we don't really mind if those creatures die in the first place, but especially with Midnight Reaper in play, we get rewarded by getting to draw a card. So we'll add 4 copies of Midnight Reaper to our deck, and then we can cut some of the weaker 3-drops, like the Deathbloom Thalet for it. And now that we've added a lot more card advantage to our deck, we can also easily cut a card like Demon Lord Balzanlock, since now we'll be drawing cards through Midnight Reaper, so we don't really need the Demon Lord as much, and this will also help us lower our curve so we don't run into situations where we have a Demon Lord stuck in hand without having 6 mana to cast it. And then the next rare we can add to our deck is 4 copies of Graveyard Marshal, which is a 2 mana 3/2 zombie soldier, and for 2 and a black we can exile a creature card from our graveyard to make a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token, which of course plays really well with some of our creatures that help us fuel the graveyard, like Stitcher Supplier, and creatures that easily end up in the graveyard, like Doomed Dissenter. So we can add 4 copies of a Graveyard Marshal to our deck. And by adding Graveyard Marshal, we can cut a weaker 2-drop like Walking Corpse, as Graveyard Marshal's just a strict upgrade. And of course, since we're mono black, the double black casting cost is not an issue. And then we can also cut the Gravewaker now that we've added another mana sink to the deck. We don't really need to get up to 6 mana and then 7 mana for the activated ability of Gravewaker. We can instead just make a bunch of zombie tokens with the Graveyard Marshal. So we're back down to 60 cards. And for our next rare, we can add 2 more copies of Deathbairn to the deck, adding another powerful Anthem effect, giving zombies +1/+1 and Death Touch, which of course plays really well if we have mostly only zombies in our deck. And our 2 copies of Vampire Sovereign can go. And then the final rare we will add to the deck is 2 copies of Gruesome Menagerie, which is a 5 mana sorcery, letting us choose a creature card with converted mana cost 1 in our graveyard, and then do the same with converted mana cost 2 and 3, and return those cards to the battlefield. So let's just return a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop from our graveyard to the battlefield, which of course plays really well with cards like Stitcher Supplier fueling the graveyard, and also being a target for us to return alongside Diregraf Ghoul at 1 mana. Then at 2 mana we've got Doomed Dissenter and Graveyard Marshal, and at 3 mana we've got Death Baron and Midnight Reaper as great creatures to return from the graveyard. So we'll add 2 copies of Gruesome Menagerie, which is a slightly more powerful version of Arise from the Grave. Of course, we won't be able to return opponents' creatures with Gruesome Menagerie, but that's not really necessary. So we can cut Arise from the Grave, and then we'll also cut a Murder for now. So we're back down to 60. And then the final piece of the puzzle is to add our Mythic Rare to the deck, and that's going to be our Mythic Rare Planeswalker, Liliana Untouched by Death, 4 mana for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. Her +1 ability puts the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard, and if at least one of them is a zombie, then each opponent loses 2 life and we gain 2 life, so powerful way to gain a bit of life against the more aggressive decks or drain out an opponent if they're on a more controlling strategy. And then the -2 gives a target creature -X until end of turn, where X is the number of zombies we control, so nice incentive for us to have lots of zombies in play. And then our -3 ability lets us cast zombie cards from our graveyard this turn, which means if we have a very full graveyard with lots of zombies, we get to play all of them as long as we have the mana to cast them. So we'll add 3 copies of Liliana Untouched by Death to our deck. And since we've added kind of a 4 mana removal spell with her -2 ability, we can cut the Ravenous Chupacabras as our final non-zombie in the deck, and we can also cut the Murder since Liliana also acts as a removal spell, but does so much more. So that rounds out the main deck. So at 1 mana we've got Diregraf Ghoul and Stitcher Supplier. At 2 mana we've got Cast Down as a cheap interactive spell alongside Vicious Offering, and then our 2 mana creatures are Doomed Dissenter and Graveyard Marshal. And then at 3 mana we've got Death Baron pumping up all zombies and Midnight Reaper drawing us extra cards. And then at 4 mana we've got 3 copies of Liliana that can also take over the game by herself, as well as Vraska's Contempt as an answer to planeswalkers and creatures. And then at 5 mana we've got some powerful curve toppers in Gruesome Menagerie, returning up to 3 creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield. And finally 2 copies of Open the Graves as another powerful enchantment, making even more zombie tokens in our deck full of creatures that are likely to end up in our graveyard, which is fine since then we can just return them with cards like Menagerie, or make use of them with cards like Graveyard Marshal, making additional zombie tokens. And then in our mana base we also have 2 copies of Memorial to Folly as another way to return creature cards from our graveyard back to our hand, and then 22 basic swamps. And let's fix the art on our basic swamp right now. I think we can do better. This one's pretty sweet. So we'll add 22 of this basic swamp, and our picture shall be Liliana, of course. Graveyard Bash version 2. Then we can also take a look at some options for the sideboard if you're interested in playing best of 3s with the deck, and those can include cards like Duress as a nice 1 mana discard effect to take a non-creature and non-land card from the opponent's hand, which is very useful against the more controlling decks. We can also add 2 copies of Sorcerer's Spyglass, for example, to shut down planeswalkers like the Fairy, or transformed lands like Azcanta the Sunken Ruin, which can provide a ton of card advantage otherwise. And another nice card against control decks is going to be Arguel's Bloodfast, which is a 2 mana enchantment, and you can pay 2 mana and 2 life to draw a card, and then you'll eventually transform Bloodfast into a land that can let you sacrifice creatures to gain some life, which also has good synergy in our deck. Then you could also include some copies of Playcrafter as another answer to planeswalkers, as when it enters the battlefield, each player has to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and each player who can't has to discard a card. So this also works nicely with some of our creatures like Stitcher Supplier and Doomed Dissenter that we don't mind sacrificing. And then, of course, if the opponent only has 1 planeswalker in play, they'll be forced to sacrifice it. Also pretty useful against some of the other decks that rely on cards like Niv Mizzet as their primary win condition, since you can make them sacrifice it without having to trigger Niv Mizzet and letting them draw a card with it. So Playcrafter definitely has its uses, but of course it's not a zombie, which is why we're not main decking it. And very similar to Playcrafter is Eldest Reborn, which is a 5 mana version that makes the opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, and then on the 2nd chapter makes them discard a card, and on the 3rd chapter can reanimate a planeswalker or creature from any graveyard to the battlefield under our control. So another nice curve topper for the deck potentially. And then we could also easily have some more copies of Vraska's Contempt in the sideboard, which is useful not only against Planeswalkers, but also against the more aggressive decks where gaining 2 life can be very useful. So we can have another copy of Vraska's Contempt. And then against the super low to the ground aggressive decks with a lot of 1 toughness creatures, we can consider a card like Fungal Infection as a 1-mana removal spell, giving target creature -1/-1 until end of turn, and also making a 1/1 sapling creature token that we can block with. And against decks with a lot of 1 toughness creatures or tokens, we can also consider 2 copies of Plague Mare as a 3-mana 2/2 that gives opposing creatures -1/-1 when it enters the battlefield. So that should round out our sideboard. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play and this hand looks okay. I've got a good 2-drop and some options on 3 mana, and then Menagerie to maybe get them back. Alright, Doomed Dissenter could also be an option, but we're still gonna lead with a Graveyard Marshal here. Opponent on green-black and a Merfolk Branchwalker, so this looks like the black-green mid-range deck. Alright. Don't really want to attack a 3/2 Marshal into Branchwalker, but if we play Death Baron first, we're fine to attack here, so I think that's the play we're gonna make. In the meantime, we also picked up a 1-drop, so if we get to 5 mana for Menagerie, we might also be able to get back a Ghoul from the graveyard if it dies. Alright, our opponent's keeping up 3 mana, they could have a cast down here, and if they kill the Death Baron, then of course the Branchwalker could trade for the Marshal, which would be bad. But if we play Midnight Reaper first, then at least we get to draw some cards if they kill our creatures here. And then we'll just attack with the Marshal, since I don't really want to trade Death Baron for Branchwalker. Opponent's fine to chum block here, but we'll see. Right, they did have a Fungal Infection to help kill our Marshal, but we still get to draw a card with our Reaper, which is nice, and then we'll play a Ghoul. Our opponent did have a small pause on turn 1 with 1 black mana available, so it's not too surprising to see the Fungal Infection. Now a Ravenous Chupacabra taking out a Reaper, drawing us an extra card. And a Liliana, a pretty nice draw here. Alright, so we've got a 2-drop and a 3-drop in our graveyard. So I don't mind attacking with a Ghoul, kind of hoping our opponent double blocks. Alright, perfect, so this is gonna be the clean 3-for-1 Menagerie. And now we're pretty far ahead. Opponent with another Chupacabra. Taking out Death Baron, drawing us an extra card with a Reaper. Contempt's a good pickup. So now's a great opportunity to get Liliana in play. And our opponent could have a Find Finality at 6 mana to sweep the board, but I think we still want to apply more pressure here, so we'll minus to take out the Chupacabra. Get in for 8. Add a Doomed Dissenter to the board, so even if they do have a sweeper effect, we still get a 2/2 zombie. And it's gonna be a District Guide instead. Gets a Forest. And another District Guide. Alright. So our opponent's got some blockers up. Another Midnight Reaper's nice. So if we just minus Liliana here to take out the District Guide and use our Vraska's Contempt on the other one, we should have lethal. Even though we would be comfortable playing a longer game by plussing Liliana as well, but I guess if we have lethal we might as well go for it. Alright, sweet. Seeing the power of Gruesome Menagerie there, and the Midnight Reaper drawing us extra cards, and just all our synergies coming together really. Sweet, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw. This hand seems okay. 3 lands, a reasonable curve. Up against blue-red. And whenever we have Ghoul and Supplier in our opening hand, we usually want to lead with Diregraf Ghoul just to apply a bit more pressure. Marshal was a good pickup, could be a nice play for next turn. Opponent with a Goblin Electromancer, which is probably a fine target for the Vicious Offering here, since decks that play Electromancer usually can do pretty scary things if they get to untap. So might as well attack first, offer the trade, but I doubt our opponent takes it. And then we'll just Vicious Offering the Electromancer while we can. And then next turn probably play Midnight Reaper. So our opponent could be on a Drake deck. They have a replacement Electromancer sadly, and a Chart of Course for 1 mana. Well, if we could see in their hand and see a second copy of Electromancer, we probably don't use the Vicious Offering there, but now we can play Midnight Reaper. I think I like that over the Death Baron, just to get the card flow going if they start pointing removal spells at our creatures. Of course, hoping to dodge a Lava Coil on Midnight Reaper, otherwise they just exile it and we don't get to draw any cards. And yep, there it is. It's too bad. The deck's definitely started playing a lot more Lava Coil lately, so that does make Midnight Reaper a little bit worse, but still a great card. Alright, so 4 mana means Death Baron plus Supplier. Seems okay. So we'll get in for 3. And they've got a Shock for the Death Baron as well. So yeah, we would much rather have seen Shock on the Midnight Reaper instead of the Lava Coil. At least we've got a pretty full graveyard for the Graveyard Marshal now. If we ever find a Gruesome Menagerie, we've got 1, 2, 3 to get back. And there's a Crackling Drake, the opponent's win condition, which is quite strong here. So yeah, opponent had the right answers and we're definitely in trouble here. Memorial sadly at the wrong time. Let's play Marshal and play a tap Memorial. So we do also have the option of activating the Memorial to get back something from the graveyard, but we wouldn't have the mana to get back anything impactful and play it in the same turn. So we're probably better off playing the Open the Graves. The problem, of course, being our opponent has a big flyer in the air. So it's not like we can chum block with our creatures and build up a giant zombie army. So we're hoping to pick up a removal spell for the Crackling Drake. And then try and take over with Open the Graves. Entrancing Melody, stealing our Graveyard Marshal. Yeah, that's pretty effective. Of course, also gets discounted by the Goblin Electromancer, which makes it even better. And now we don't get to make zombies with our Marshal, sadly. Yeah, this was quite a beating. Let's play Open the Graves. And I don't even know if we can attack here, but we're also just gonna die to the Crackling Drake, so it's kind of a lose-lose situation. Yeah, I don't think we can afford to attack. So we're gonna take at least 7, down to 2, dead to any burn spell. And yeah, swamp the draw, it's not gonna cut it. So yeah, Midnight Reaper also got exiled, so can't bring him back. Alright, GG's. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand's a little bit on the clunky side with all 3 and 4 drops, but I don't think we can mulligan, and then just hope to draw into some cheaper cards we can play next turn. Being on the play does make up for it a little bit. Alright, another Reaper instead. So we've got a powerful hand, just a bit of a slow hand, and our opponent leading with a turn 1 Llanowar Elves. It's gonna make that even worse. And there's a turn 2 Steel Leaf Champion, which is about as scary as it gets. Alright, at least we drew the land. So I think we lead with the Midnight Reaper here. And then next turn we could either Contempt, we could play Death Baron, try to block with a Death Touching Midnight Reaper, Could also play Liliana, but that doesn't seem great if our opponent still has a Steel Leaf Champion in play. Pelt Collector plus Druid of the Cowl. Alright. So, I've got a few options. I guess Death Baron plus Stitcher Supplier is pretty attractive here, since we get to put multiple death-touching creatures in play. And the mono-green deck usually doesn't have much removal for cards like Death Baron. So pretty effective card here. And then keep the Vraska's Contempt to answer something like a Galta, which otherwise can trample over and kill us. Jade Light Ranger, alright. So opponent's unlikely to attack with the Steel Leaf Champion. Ooh, Gigantosaurus, that's a scary one too. But they also have a Galta, so they have it all here. And now they do, of course, attack with the Steel Leaf Champion. Alright, I mean, we're still gonna trade here, I think. I mean, we could also just block the Gigantosaurus with one of our Death Touch creatures, so as long as we have Death Burn, we're not too concerned. So this seems fine. But their opponent definitely very fast on the board here, thanks to those mana elves. Alright. Doomed Dissenter can also buy some time, and a Vicious Offering not as good as Cast Down would have been here, so this turn we're forced to Vraska's Contempt Galta, otherwise we're pretty much dead. So let's pass the turn. Gigantosaurus. Galta and Jade Light attack. Can't afford to trade off Death Baron, since we need Death Baron plus Death Touch creature to deal with Gigantosaurus. So we'll just Contempt Galta here. Gain 2, take 3, down to 12. And hope that their leftovers don't include another copy of Galta. So with the Ghoul coming into play tapped, it's not a blocker for Gigantosaurus. So we're probably better off going a Reaper plus Doomed Dissenter here. Alright. Thorn Lieutenant is beatable, and another one. Alright. So far so good. Jade Light attacks, and Gigantosaurus as well. I think we're fine trading the Reaper for Gigantosaurus here, and then just jump blocking the Jade Light Ranger, drawing an extra card with a Midnight Reaper while he's still around. Draw some more cards. Alright, and then open the graves too, so we're definitely doing it here. So I think getting more Death Touch creatures in place is probably what we want to do. So I think we go Stitcher Supplier plus open the graves here. Still gotta play defense for a while, but then Liliana can threaten to take over the game once the ground is stable. But of course we're hoping to dodge another Galta here, and yeah, our opponent just has to concede. Just too many zombies coming up, too much card advantage, and then eventually Liliana was gonna take over. So yeah, as long as you can manage the trampling creatures out of the mono-green deck, with your removal spells you can kind of stall out the ground and take over the game with a powerful card like Open the Graves, Menagerie, Reaper drawing cards, Liliana. Alright, so that's gonna do it for today's upgrade guide. Feel free to let me know in the comments which deck we should upgrade next. But for now, I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also wanna thank all my patrons for being part of the channel, and you can become a patron yourself today and decide the topic of future videos over at patreon.com/LegenVD.